I was born and raised in this foggy coastal town. The apartment building I live in was built in the 1960s, a grey, blocky, patched-up concrete monolith that looked like a giant tomb. Here, the basement is the only place that never sees sunlight. It is a vast, communal space, divided into dozens of storage cages fenced with B40 chain-link mesh for residents to keep old belongings. The basement door sits at the end of the ground floor hallway, right next to the laundry room. It is always locked with a rusty brass padlock. That afternoon, a light rain was falling, and the chilly air reminded me of an old wool coat I had stored in the basement since last winter. Holding the key, I walked down the peeling concrete stairs. As soon as I opened the door, a musty smell mixed with the stench of rotting cardboard rushed into my nose. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered a few times before emitting a deafening buzzing noise. I walked along the narrow aisle between two rows of storage cages. Other tenants' cages were filled with old toys, broken armed mannequins, and piles of dusty blankets. My storage unit was in the last row, right against the load-bearing concrete wall. I inserted the key into my chain-link cage lock. Click, the mesh door swung open. Everything was as usual, except for one small detail. A cardboard box filled with old books weighing nearly 20 kilograms, which I had originally placed on the top shelf, was now lying tilted on the floor right near the entrance. I froze. This box was very heavy. I distinctly remembered having to use all my strength to lift it onto the shelf last time to prevent water damage if the basement leaked. How could it have fallen? If it fell from a height of 2 meters, the cardboard box should have been severely crushed. But this box was merely lying there, its lid slightly open as if someone had placed it down carefully. I bent down and lifted the box. Strange, it felt significantly lighter. I opened the lid to look inside. The thick novels was still there, but in the corner of the box, a small wooden box containing my childhood keepsakes, including a silver bracelet left by my late mother, had vanished. I swallowed hard, a cold shiver running down my spine. Was it a thief? But the basement door was always locked, and my chain-link cage was still securely padlocked. I looked at the surrounding cages. Everything was still quiet, the sound of water dripping rhythmically somewhere in the dark. Drip. Drip. I convinced myself that maybe I remembered incorrectly, that perhaps I had moved the small box upstairs last month and forgotten about it. I put the cardboard box back on the shelf, grabbed my old wool coat, and quickly left the basement. As I locked the wooden door, I had a feeling that a pair of eyes was staring intently at my back through the dark chain-link mesh. 2 weeks later, my apartment experienced a local power outage in the kitchen due to a shorted light bulb. I needed a screwdriver and electrical tape. Remembering my dad's heavy metal toolbox kept in the basement, I had to hold a flashlight and walk downstairs again. The basement was colder than usual today. The broken ventilation fan emitted a groaning sound like someone gasping for air. I walked quickly toward my storage cage, the flashlight beam sweeping across the dark spaces between units. When I stood in front of my storage unit, my heart skipped a beat. My dad's heavy-duty steel toolbox, weighing nearly 15 kilograms, was lying right in the middle of the cage floor. The thick dust on the surface of the metal box had been wiped clean by smudged handprints. This time, I was 100% certain I hadn't touched it. Last time, I had stored it deep in the corner of the second shelf. I didn't open the cage right away. I stood still, shining the flashlight around the unit. The flashlight beam cast light onto the ceiling, where a maze of drainage pipes and heating pipes ran through the entire basement. On a section of the metal pipe wrapped in gray insulation right above my cage, there were long scrape marks. The thick layer of dust accumulated over many years on the pipe was wiped clean, leaving shiny streaks. It wasn't just one mark, but a series of parallel streaks spaced at regular intervals. They looked like fingernail scratches, or more accurately, the marks of a hand with 5 abnormally long fingers clinging to the pipe to swing across. "Is anyone there?" I called out. My voice trembled. echoing before fading away in the gloomy space. There was no answer, only the creak of metal expanding and contracting from the heating system. I looked up at the pipes, following the scrape marks. They started from the darkest corner of the basement, ran along my cage, and extended toward the dark hidden corner behind row 4, where discarded belongings of tenants who had moved away 10 years ago were kept. A mixture of curiosity and fear impelled me to walk toward row number 4. The flashlight beam swayed on the damp concrete wall. When I shone the light inside cage number 4, I noticed something strange. The cardboard boxes stacked here were not covered in dust like everywhere else. The edge of one box was shredded into tiny fibers, as if someone had torn it apart with their teeth. Lying right next to the shredded box was a bone-dry chicken bone. But the joint end was crushed to pieces to extract the marrow inside. A faint foul odor drifted up, not the smell of trash, but the smell of decomposing meat mixed with the body odor of someone who hadn't bathed in a long time. I took a step back. My foot stepped on something round on the floor. I bent down and shone the light. It was a plastic bottle cap crushed flat, with clear indentations of human tooth marks imprinted on its body. I could no longer maintain my composure. The next day, I went to see Uncle Bao, the security guard and building manager who had worked here for over 20 years. Uncle Bao was a heavy smoker, slightly hunchbacked, with perpetually dull eyes. "Uncle Bao, has anyone been living illegally in the basement lately?" I asked as he sat puffing on a cigarette at the security desk. Uncle Bao looked up, exhaling a cloud of gray smoke. "Are you crazy? The basement door is always locked. Only residents have keys. Who would crawl down into that tomb for? But my things were moved. There are tear marks on the boxes. And there's a really strange smell." Uncle Bao sighed and shook his head. "Sewer rats. It's been raining a lot lately, and the water level is rising. So sewer rats as big as calves crawl up through the pipes. I'll throw some rat poison down there tomorrow." I knew it wasn't rats. The structure of the bite marks and the streaks on the pipes couldn't belong to a rat. That afternoon, I decided to go back down to the basement once more to take photos as evidence to force Uncle Bao to come down and check. I brought my phone and a utility knife as a self-defense weapon. As the basement door opened, the foul smell today was noticeably stronger. It was distinctly the stench of a biological body. I walked straight to my chain-link cage. The door was still locked, but when I looked inside, my heart stopped beating. A plastic bin containing my summer clothes had a large hole chewed through it. The hard plastic lid was fractured into pieces, the plastic shards thrust inward. A windbreaker jacket of mine had been pulled out through the hole. But it wasn't lying on the floor. It was hanging on the B40 wire mesh wall. The two sleeves were twisted together, tied into an extremely complex and tight knot, the kind of knot that only a human hand with dexterity and immense pulling force could tie. I reached out my hand, intending to untie the knot to inspect it. The fabric of the jacket was strangely damp. When my fingers touched it, a sticky, slimy liquid with a pungent metallic stench clung to my hands. It was blood, dried blood mixed with saliva. Shush, shush. A sound echoed right behind me. It wasn't footsteps. It was the sound of coarse fabric rubbing against the concrete floor. The sound of something crawling along the ground. I froze on the spot. My entire body went rigid. The flashlight in my hand began to tremble. That sound came from the narrow space between my row of cages and the concrete wall behind it, a gap less than 40 centimeters wide, originally intended only for water pipes to run through. Who's there?" I whispered, my voice cracking with fear. The sound stopped. Then, a prolonged, wheezing breath like that of a person with severe asthma sounded right next to my ear, separated only by a layer of B40 wire mesh. I didn't turn around. Survival instinct screamed in my head, "Run now." I dropped the jacket, turned around, and bolted toward the stairs. My foot kicked a discarded iron box on the path. making a harsh clattering noise that echoed throughout the basement. Behind me, the crawling sound turned into violent thuds and leaps. Thud, thud, thud. That thing was rushing after me on the pipe system on the ceiling. I dashed up the concrete stairs, banged hard against the wooden door, inserted the key with trembling hands, threw the door open, and burst into the brightly lit ground floor hallway. I slammed the basement door shut, leaned my back against it, panting heavily like I had just escaped death. My heart pounded so hard my chest hurt. I looked down at my hands. The pungent, foul liquid was still sticking to my fingers. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. My apartment was on the first floor, directly above the basement area. Around 2 a.m., when the entire building fell into dead silence, I lay in bed and heard strange noises. Knock, knock, knock. A light knocking sound echoed from beneath the floor, directly under my bed. I held my breath, pulling the blanket up to my neck. The knocking didn't stop. It turned into a scratching sound. Scratch, 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 as if someone was using their fingernails to repeatedly scrape the concrete ceiling of the basement, right at the spot corresponding to my bedroom floor. Then came a voice. It was extremely faint, a distorted whisper coming through the half-meter thick concrete. So cold. Give me jacket. I sat up, turning on all the lights in the room. That voice belonged to a human, but it didn't sound like a normal person's voice. It was whispering, intermittent, carrying a bizarre intonation as if the speaker hadn't used the vocal cords in a very long time. The next morning, I rushed down to the security room. Uncle Bao was sitting there eating breakfast. I snatched his bowl of noodles, shouting, "There's someone in the basement. Last night he scraped my floor. You must call the police right now." Uncle Bao looked at me with an extremely annoyed expression. "Are you hallucinating? I was on guard here all night. No one passed through the basement door. The key is still hanging right here." He pointed to the wooden board where the keys hung. "He's been living down there for a long time. He doesn't need to go through the main door." I roared, "If you don't come down to check with me, I will call 113 myself." Seeing my desperate determination and my gaunt face from lack of sleep, Uncle Bao sighed, grabbed an iron rod and a large flashlight. "Fine. Let's go, so I can show you there's nothing down there except dust and rats." Uncle Bao and I went down to the basement together. This time, with Uncle Bao holding the iron rod, I felt a little less afraid. Uncle Bao switched on the main power breaker, and the fluorescent lights flickered on. "There, look," Uncle Bao pointed along the aisle. "There's nothing." "Go behind my cage," I urged. We walked toward my storage cage. Uncle Bao looked at the punctured plastic bin and the knotted jacket. This time, his facial expression shifted slightly. He stepped closer, reaching out to touch the knot on the jacket. "This," Uncle Bao whispered, "this knot is a sailor's knot." "What did you say?" Uncle Bao didn't answer me. He shone his flashlight into the narrow space against the concrete wall behind the cage. He narrowed his eyes, then stepped over to cage number 4 next door. "Look at this." Uncle Bao's voice began to tremble. I stepped forward. The B40 wire mesh separating cage number 4 and cage number 5 was shredded. It hadn't been cut with pliers. The thick steel mesh had been twisted and bent apart, creating a hole about 60 centimeters in diameter. This hole continued into cage number 6, then cage number 7. An underground tunnel created by ripping through consecutive steel mesh panels ran straight through a series of storage units. "My God," Uncle Bao whispered, the iron rod in his hand trembling slightly. Who could break B40 steel mesh with their bare hands? We followed the path of holes. It led deep into the innermost corner of the basement, where an old utility room had been locked up and abandoned over 10 years ago due to water leaks. The iron door of the utility room was pried open just enough for a gaunt person to squeeze through. Uncle Bao raised his flashlight to illuminate the pitch-black room. An overpowering stench rushed out, making us cover our noses and cough violently. The inside of the utility room was far from empty. In the middle of the floor was a nest. It was made from hundreds of coats, blankets, and towels stolen from the storage cages, stacked into a circular cushion. Surrounding the nest were hundreds of ready-to-eat food cans coarsely pried open, countless empty mineral water bottles, and piles of animal bones. But the most terrifying thing lay on the concrete wall behind the nest. Hundreds of filthy handprints, smeared with blood and soot, covered the wall completely. Some handprints were stamped at a height of over 3 meters, right near the ceiling pipes, and between those handprints were words scraped into the concrete with sharp objects. "Don't let it find me. I am hungry. Police are the enemy." Uncle Bao took 2 steps back, nearly falling over. What the hell is this? Is there a madman living down here?" I stepped closer to the wall, shining my flashlight into the corner of the utility room. Beside the nest of clothes was a pile of items carefully gathered, old wallets with all cash gone but IDs still intact, a few pieces of craft rings, broken watches, and a stack of family photos belonging to the building's residents. This intruder wasn't just living in the basement. He had been secretly watching all of us. He rummaged through our belongings, studying the lives of every family. "Uncle Bao, look at this." I pointed to the corner of the utility room floor. There was a small tunnel. It was an old abandoned sewage drain, about 70 centimeters in diameter, leading directly into the city's underground sewer system. The mesh grate at the drainage mouth was completely destroyed. This intruder didn't enter the building through the main entrance. He came up from the underground sewers, turned this basement into his lair, and survived off the belongings and stored food of the residents for months, or perhaps even years. "We must call the police immediately." Uncle Bao nervously pulled out his phone. Just then, the fluorescent lights in the basement flickered repeatedly. Click, click, pop. The entire lighting system of the basement went pitch black. The whole room plunged into complete darkness. Only the light from my flashlight and Uncle Bao's remained. Rustle. The sound came from directly above our heads. Uncle Bao aimed his flashlight at the ceiling of the utility room. Right on the heating pipe running through the room, a human figure was doubled over, clinging tightly to the pipe like a giant spider. He was skin and bones, his pale skin devoid of life. He wore numerous layers of tattered coats stacked on top of each other. Long, matted hair covered almost his entire face. And through the strands of hair, his eyes reflected the flashlight beam, bloodshot, wild, and completely devoid of humanity. "Ah!" Uncle Bao shrieked in horror, dropping his iron rod. The human figure let go. Thud! He fell right between me and Uncle Bao. The suffocating stench emanating from his body choked me. In that brief moment under the swaying flashlight beam, I saw his face, high cheekbones protruding like 2 blades. His lips bitten raw to reveal yellowed, sharp teeth. He didn't attack immediately. He let out a low growl in his throat, a sound like that of a wild beast driven into a corner. "Run!" I screamed, shoving Uncle Bao toward the utility room door. The mutant humanoid lunged forward, moving on both hands and feet. He crawled across the concrete floor at terrifying speed, slapping his hands hard against the floor. He grabbed Uncle Bao's ankle. "Help me!" Uncle Bao fell backward onto the floor, his flashlight flying far away. Without thinking much, I lunged forward and used the utility knife in my hand to stab hard into his arm. The blade snapped in half when it struck his thick coat stiffened with dried sweat. But the force of the strike was enough to make him let go. He turned his head to glare at me, emitting a piercing shriek, screech. I pulled Uncle Bao up. Both of us frantically fled through the holes in the B-40 mesh. Behind us, the sound of him crawling in pursuit, tearing through cardboard boxes, clattered wildly. Rip, rip, bang. He moved in the darkness of the familiar basement far better than we did. He didn't run on the floor, he climbed onto the storage shelves. Leaping from one shelf to another, metal boxes and wooden crates were hurled down to the floor by him to block our path. Hurry up, Uncle Bao, I shouted, shining my flashlight ahead as I ran. Uncle Bao was old and frail, gasping for air, his footsteps stumbling, when we were only about 10 meters away from the stairs leading to the ground floor. A dark shadow plunged down from the ceiling, blocking our path right in front of us. It was him. He stood upright, his back hunched over, his arms hanging past his knees. He extended a hand, his black fingernails long and sharp like iron hooks. "My stuff," he wheezed, his voice raspy and muffled. "Everything down here belongs to me." In a panic, Uncle Bao grabbed a nearby iron box and threw it forcefully at his face. The box struck his head, causing him to stagger a step backward. Seizing the opportunity, I pulled Uncle Bao past him, sprinting up the concrete steps. I shoved Uncle Bao out into the hallway, then used all my strength to slam the thick wooden basement door shut. Bang, bang, bang. Instantly, from the other side of the door, the freakish man began flinging his body violently against the wood. The door shuddered, flakes of peeling paint falling to the floor. "Hold the door," I yelled, throwing my entire body weight against the door to brace it. Uncle Bao joined me, pressing against it as well. "Phone, call the police now," I screamed. Uncle Bao nervously pulled out his phone and dialed 113. "Hello, is this the police? Basement of apartment building 42 Tran Hung Dao Street. There's a pervert. No. A monster. He's attacking us. Hurry," Uncle Bao shouted into the phone. Behind the door, the banging stopped. A chilling silence enveloped the hallway. Then, we heard a soft scratching at the threshold crack at the bottom of the door. A gaunt, grey hand squeezed through the narrow gap beneath the wooden door, desperately trying to grab my ankle. I jumped back in shock. The hand curled up, its fingers clawing against the hallway tile floor until they bled, leaving fresh streaks of blood scattered around. "Help me," a whispered voice came from the other side of the door. "Don't let them catch me." 15 minutes later, police sirens wailed outside on the street. 2 patrol cars pulled up in front of the apartment entrance. 4 police officers drew their guns and rushed into the hallway. "What's going on here?" the police chief asked, looking at me and Uncle Bao panting in panic beside the basement door. "In the basement, there's a lunatic living down there. He just attacked us." I pointed at the door. The police chief looked at the fresh bloodstains on the floor, his face turning grim. He gestured to his 3 colleagues to prepare their guns and flashlights. "Open the door. Everyone stand back." The basement door swung open once again. This time, 4 police officers stepped down the concrete stairs, guns drawn. Uncle Bao and I followed behind. Neither of us dared to stray far from the officers. "Talk to me, whoever is down there. Raise your hands and step out," the police chief shouted. There was no reply, only the erratic hum of the ventilation fan. The police switched on high-powered flashlights, sweeping away the shadows in the basement. They advanced toward the utility room, where the nest was located. When they stepped into the utility room, the officers also shuddered at the gruesome sight. The pile of clothes formed into a nest, the piles of animal bones, and hundreds of handprints on the wall. "My God, what is this? How long has he been living here?" a young police officer gasped. "At least 6 months," I spoke up. "Look at the amount of empty food cans over there." The police chief approached the wall, shining his light on the scraped inscriptions. But when he saw a small line written in a hidden corner near the floor, his face suddenly turned pale. The line read, "Provincial Mental Hospital Code, Patient 099. The police chief immediately pulled out his walkie-talkie and switched to an internal channel. "Control. We have a code red incident at apartment 42. Patient 099 from the 2021 experimental project. He is here. Request immediate dispatch of the Special Task Force." I froze. Experimental project, Patient 099. "Hey sir, who is he?" I asked. The police chief turned to look at me, his eyes cold as ice. This is beyond your jurisdiction. You and the security guard go upstairs immediately and lock your doors. Do not speak of this to anyone, or you will be charged with disclosing national secrets." An escalating sense of dread gripped me. The intruder in this basement wasn't merely a homeless man or an escaped mental patient. He was the product of something far more terrifying. Just then, from inside the sewer drain in the corner of the utility room, an agonizing roar echoed out. "Arrgghhh." The sound wasn't human. It was the roar of someone suffering torment to the very core of his bones. Even though the police ordered us to go upstairs, I couldn't sleep. Uncle Bao sat chain-smoking in the security room, his face drained of all color. I returned to my apartment. As I re-examined the old wool coat I had retrieved from the cardboard box in part 1, I discovered something that had fallen out of its pocket, a tiny micro SD memory card. It definitely didn't belong to me. That man had stuffed it into my coat pocket during one of his sneaks into my storage cage. I plugged the memory card into my computer. Inside, there was only a single folder containing a few scanned images of old documents and a short video clip. I opened the first image. It was a medical record file named Tran Van Nam, a former military officer who went missing in 2021. The photo attached to the file was the face of the gaunt man in the basement. But in the photo, he looked dignified and kind. The document stated clearly, Tran Van Nam participated in a serum trial to enhance biological endurance. Side effects: loss of behavioral control, mutations in bone density and muscle tissue, severe memory degradation, craving for raw meat. I played the video clip. A stark white laboratory room appeared on the screen. Tran Van Nam was chained to a chair. I want to go home. Tran Van Nam wept in the video. Tears mixed with blood running from his eyes. I miss my daughter. She lives at apartment 42 Tran Hung Dao. My heart pounded rapidly. Apartment 42 Tran Hung Dao. This was my building. Mr. Nam hadn't chosen this basement as his lair by accident. He had crawled for kilometers through toxic underground sewers, fighting against the horrific mutations of his body, just to return to where his daughter used to live. I suddenly remembered the stack of family photos I had seen in the nest inside the utility room. Among them were countless pictures of a young girl. I rushed out of my apartment, running to Unit 2B across from my place. That was the home of Lin, a young woman living alone who had moved here 2 years ago after her father went missing. Bang, 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 I pounded on Lin's door. "Lin, open the door, hurry," I yelled. The door opened. Lin looked at me with a bewildered expression. "What's wrong, brother?" Your father's name is Tran Van Nam, right?" Lin's face immediately lost its color. She took a step back, her eyes brimming with tears. How do you know my father's name?" "My father has been missing for 3 years." Before I could explain to Lin, the entire building suddenly shook gently. Boom, boom. The sound of electrical explosions echoed from the basement. Street lights, hallway lights, and the power system of the entire apartment complex went out completely. Dense darkness enveloped everything. In the basement, gunfire erupted rapidly. Bang, bang, bang. Shouts from the special task force, shattering glass, and the terrifying roars of Mr. Nam echoed through the utility shafts, rushing straight up to the upper floors. "What's happening down there?" Lin held onto my arm in terror. "Your father, he's in the basement." I took Lin's hand. "But he's not normal anymore. The police are hunting him." "What?" Lin burst into tears. Just then, we heard a bizarre sound coming from inside the concrete wall of the hallway. Rustle, rustle. It was no longer in the basement. Mr. Nam was crawling inside the hollow utility shaft, the space containing water pipes running through the walls of all 5 floors. Crack. The drywall covering the utility shaft at the end of the first floor hallway shattered open. A gaunt, bloody hand reached out. Mr. Nam squeezed out from the wall. His body had multiple broken bones from gunshot wounds, but the monstrous serum in his blood forced him to keep moving. He crawled along the hallway floor, leaving a long trail of blood behind him. The light from my phone shone on his face. His two eyes were cloudy and blind. He moved entirely by hearing and smell. "Lynn," he wheezed, his voice filled with agony. "Daughter, where are you? Dad brought wool coat for you." Lynn froze in horror. She saw her mother's silver bracelet, the one missing from my storage box in part 1, tightly clasped around Mr. Nam's bloody wrist. It turned out Mr. Nam hadn't stolen things to vandalize. He had snuck into my storage cage, found the wool coat and his family's old silver bracelet, and retrieved them to bring up to his daughter. "Dad!" Lynn screamed, about to rush forward. I held Lynn tight. "Calm down. He doesn't recognize you. The serum has destroyed his brain." Lynn's scream instantly drew Mr. Nam's attention. His ears twitched. He turned his head toward us, emitted a threatening growl, and lunged forward at extreme speed. "Get inside." I shoved Lynn into apartment 2B, then dashed inside behind her, slamming the door shut. Bang! The violent impact from Mr. Nam cracked the wooden door in half. A mutated hand thrust through the crack, groping around to find the door lock. "Do something," Lynn sobbed uncontrollably. "Dad, please stop." I rushed into the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of cooking oil and a powder fire extinguisher. I poured the entire bottle of oil onto the floor right in front of the entrance to create a slick surface. The wooden door was kicked wide open. Mr. Nam charged in, but the moment his feet crossed the threshold, he slipped on the oil patch, his head slamming hard onto the concrete floor. I held the fire extinguisher, spraying the white powder directly into Mr. Nam's face. PSSSSSS. The extinguisher powder choked Mr. Nam, making him cough violently and temporarily lose his orientation. He waved his arms helplessly in the air, roaring in pain. "Lynn, run outside," I shouted. We scrambled past Mr. Nam, running out into the hallway. But as soon as we reached the staircase, we bumped into the special task force. 4 soldiers clad in black gear and gas masks stood with red laser-sighted submachine guns raised. "Target acquired. Prepare to neutralize," the squad leader barked into his comms. "Don't shoot, he's human." Lynn threw herself in front of the gun barrels. Out of the way, the squad leader shoved Lynn onto the floor. "This subject is a dangerous biological test specimen. We have orders to terminate on site." I rushed over to help Lynn up. "Who are you people? What experimental project? You turned him into this?" The squad leader didn't bother to answer. He gestured to his subordinates to advance into apartment 2B. Inside the room, Mr. Nam had just wiped the extinguisher powder from his face. When he saw the red laser dots dancing on his body, the combat instincts of a former military officer flared up within him. He let out a deafening roar, charging straight at the special task force. Bang, 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 bang. Submachine gun fire tore through the night. Lynn's apartment became a miniature war zone. Bullets embedded into the concrete walls, spewing smoke. Despite taking multiple gunshots, Mr. Nam managed to overpower 2 special operators thanks to his monstrous strength. He slammed one operator onto the floor, snapping his submachine gun in 2 with his bare hands. However, the squad leader pulled out a high-voltage taser gun. Crackle, crackle, crackle. 2 electrical prongs struck Mr. Nam's chest. Millions of volts surged through his gaunt body. Mr. Nam convulsed violently, his muscles contracting involuntarily. He collapsed onto the floor, smoke rising from his body. "Dad," Lynn wept hysterically, trying to rush forward, but I held her firmly. The squad leader approached Mr. Nam as he squirmed on the floor. He drew a syringe filled with a black liquid, intending to inject it into his neck to destroy his cells. "Stop," I yelled. I backed up all the documents from his memory card. I set it to automatically broadcast onto the internet if I die or get arrested. The squad leader froze. He turned his head to glare at me through his gas mask. "What did you just say?" His voice was cold as ice. "I know about Project Night Demon from 2021. I lied to gamble our lives. I know you used discharged officers as test subjects. If you kill him here, every document will flood major news outlets by tomorrow morning." A terrifying silence hung over the room. The squad leader looked at me, then at Lynn, who had cried all her tears out, and then down at the mutated man wheezing on the floor. The look in Mr. Nam's eyes at this moment suddenly became remarkably clear. Perhaps the high-voltage current had temporarily suppressed the monstrous virus in his brain. Or perhaps paternal love had awakened the remaining fragment of his humanity. Mr. Nam looked at Lin. From his cloudy eye sockets, a single tear rolled down his streak of dried blood. "Lin," he whispered, his voice entirely that of a normal father. "Your wool coat." Trembling, he extended his bloody hand, dropping the silver bracelet and the wool coat onto the floor. Lin crawled over, grasping her father's hesitant hand. "Dad, I'm here. I'm Lin. Dad. Dad is sorry." Mr. Nam smiled, a bitter, heartbroken smile. "Dad can't stay." Mr. Nam glanced at the Special Task Force leader, then looked at me. Using his final strength, he whispered into my ear, "Burn the documents in the basement." With that, Mr. Nam suddenly grabbed a nearby damaged fire extinguisher and smashed it hard against its pressure valve. Boom! A minor pressure explosion occurred, a cloud of white powder instantly blanketing the entire room. In the ensuing chaos, Mr. Nam summoned every ounce of his remaining strength to leap onto the first-floor balcony, throwing himself down into the apartment's underground sewer system below. "Pursue him," the squad leader ordered. The operators immediately rushed to the balcony, spraying bullets down into the dark sewer water below. However, Mr. Nam's dark shadow had already sunk into the swift current, disappearing into the deep underground sewer network of the city. The next morning, the sun rose over the foggy town. Police sealed off the entire basement of apartment building 42. Uncle Bao was fired and had to move away. The authorities announced to the residents that it was merely an intrusion by a dangerous drug addict who had been shot down. The Special Task Force cleared out the entire utility room, erasing all handprints and scraped writings on the wall. The basement was resurfaced with fresh concrete, and the B-40 chain-link cages were completely dismantled and replaced with enclosed roller shutter storage units. Lin moved away from the apartment building a week later. Before leaving, she met me and handed back her mother's silver bracelet. "You know," Lin said, her eyes fixed on the river bordering the town, "I know my dad is still alive." "How are you so sure?" I asked. Lin handed me a small piece of paper she had found inside the wool coat Mr. Nam had left behind. On it was scribbled, yet distinct words. "I will always be below, protecting you." I returned to my normal life, but everything was no longer the same. It is now 2 a.m. I am sitting in my bedroom. The entire apartment complex has fallen asleep. I turn off the lights and place my ear against the concrete floor. Knock, knock, knock. A faint knocking sound echoes from below. Then, a soft scraping sound slides along the water pipes. I am no longer afraid. I know that beneath the gaps of this city, in the cold, dark sewers, Mr. Nam, and perhaps dozens of other victims of that horrific project, are still surviving. They are still crawling in the darkness. They watch us. They live off the scraps of the world above. And whenever you hear a strange noise beneath your floor, or find a cardboard box shifted in your storage unit, don't convince yourself it's just a rat. Because someone might be standing right beneath your feet, looking up through a gap, waiting for a door to open.